So with Hyperion opening at Thorpe Park in just a few weeks now, it's an extremely exciting time for anyone who's a fan of Thorpe Park or just theme parks in general. However, I did today just want to take a little moment to look into the future, to maybe open our brains up to something that could be happening a little bit later down the line with Thorpe Park. Because obviously we've been so hyped up about Hyperion over the last 2 years now, maybe even longer, if you count the build up to the actual announcement that it was happening. So it kind of made me realise that, okay, we're getting this big new thing this year, we've been waiting for this for so long, and everyone kind of collectively, when you asked them 2 years ago, what do you want at Thorpe Park, everyone's answer was a new roller coaster, which is understandable because they haven't had one since 2012. But today I wanted to talk about something that kind of came to my attention a little bit while I was visiting the park a few weeks ago, and that's through The Walking Dead, the ride, and just kind of the future that it's going to have at the park. So I'm going to be going through all of this in today's video, just kind of exploring what could actually happen, because that is a fairly big building. It's kind of an uneasy future for The Walking Dead, and I'll explain a little bit more about why I think that in today's video. But if you do go on to enjoy it, make sure you like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll have a few more videos lined up that you guys really enjoy. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So before we get into the nitty gritty of what I think could be happening to The Walking Dead, the ride, let's do a little bit of a brief park history that this IP has had at Thorpe Park, because it's actually quite extensive compared to some of the other IPs. Even Saw, there's kind of been more that's happened with The Walking Dead over the last 5 or 6 years than a lot of other IPs at different parks across the UK. Obviously 2017 we had the addition of 2 new Fright Night mazes, one being Sanctum and the other Living Nightmare, both themed to The Walking Dead. This was a pretty exciting thing at the time. Obviously the kind of last major big IP thing of Fright Nights was in 2013, I believe, and that was obviously with the entire kind of takeover they had that year with Cabin in the Woods, Blair Witch, and all these other kind of horror franchises. That was really cool. So it was really nice seeing The Walking Dead there, and then obviously that leads us into 2018, which was kind of a pivotal year for the IP, as it was kind of the cementation of it at Thorpe Park. We had the entire year be branded as the year of The Walking Dead. Not only did we get The Walking Dead ride open in 2018, but we also saw a few tweaks and changes to the Fright Nights lineup. Obviously with Sanctum kind of transitioning over from the Swarm Island over to currently where Vortex and Rush is, and that was obviously then kind of rebranded into The Walking Dead Do or Die, which I actually have a real soft spot for. I absolutely loved that maze. And Living Nightmare was also there that year, so they kind of had it as this permanent almost fixture at Fright Nights for a good long while, obviously ending a few years ago. Obviously Living Nightmare is no longer there, and neither is Do or Die at Fright Nights. However, The Walking Dead the ride still is, so it is kind of the last remnants of the IP of The Walking Dead at the park. So it kind of begs the question, what's going to happen next? So this obviously is kind of linked to a wider discussion about IPs at the resort, because they've had plenty over the years and only a few of them have kind of stuck. Obviously we had I'm a Celebrity, which was there for a good few years and then kind of transitioned into Jungle Escape and fizzled out into what we know as trailers at the moment. We also had Angry Birds Land, which has been also removed. That's no longer at the park just as of this last close season. So that is kind of a pivotal point. Along with Angry Birds Land, Black Mirror is now kind of being removed. Obviously we have Black Mirror Labyrinth that opened in 2021. However, that's now gone with a very short lifespan. And of course the last kind of big IP being Saw the Ride, that has kind of been a very permanent fixture. Obviously we did lose Saw Alive not that long ago, but at the end of the day Saw is kind of here to stay, I would say. I don't really see a world in which they get rid of Saw. I think it's kind of a bit too iconic for them. And you obviously also kind of, if you count it, Darren Brown's Ghost Train, if you count that as kind of more of an IP, that is also now been phased out. So when you look at the history of all these IPs at the park, their lifespan isn't very long, and over the last few years, particularly with Angry Birds Land and Black Mirror, they are dropping like flies. So it's interesting to kind of sit here and think, well, I mean, if we've lost 2 big IPs over the last year or so, and one of those IPs only opening in 2021, what is the fate of the Walking Dead ride looking like? So obviously, this all kind of comes down to how popular it is for the park. Obviously, at the moment, I would say it's fairly popular. It's a lot more popular than Black Mirror has been over the last few years, and I do think it is a very decent attraction. However, obviously popularity is everything. The queue lines are full most of the time. Like, you'll normally see it with about a 40-minute upwards queue, so there's not really too much trouble with its popularity, but that's not kind of the only driving factor. We've also got to consider they're paying for this IP to be there, so whether or not they're contractually obliged to run it for a few years, and then when that runs out they can either choose to renew it or, you know, kind of get rid of it. So that could be a very big turning point eventually. I don't know anything about like contracts or laws or nothing, so I don't know how that works. That could be in a year, that could be in 5 years for all we know. However, I would imagine that that's kind of the structure of things, but don't quote me on that. I'm not a legality person, if that's even what you call them, or a lawyer, that's it, that's the word. But yeah, that is how I imagine it kind of works. So let's now say we live in a hypothetical world. The Walking Dead The Ride announced its closure. What could actually happen next? Well, there's actually a number of things that happen, because this entire building has a lot of history attached to it, particularly stretching right back to very close to when Thorpe Park opened, like pre-2000s. I'm of course talking about X No Way Out. Now this opened in 1996, so even prior to Colossus. So the ride's been here for a long while, and it was a very popular attraction at the time. Obviously I was a bit too young at the time to even, well, I say I was a bit too young, I wasn't even born. So it was very much before my time. However, obviously it was a very unique attraction, obviously with it taking place in the dark, and there was even a backward section towards the end of the ride that obviously spiced things up quite a bit. So it was kind of a little bit of a cult classic, and then if we move kind of a little bit further down the timeline, a few decades later in 2013, it was then rebranded to just X. Now I do remember this, and it was an amazing attraction. I absolutely loved X. It was basically the same ride minus the backwards, but just with strobe lights and music. It was amazing. Just think of kind of a little bit like Rock and Roller Coaster over at Disney on a smaller budget, but it was a really great attraction. It was just one of those things where you're not really going to get a massive thrill out of it, but it was a nice thing to experience. And then obviously further in that, you kind of got The Walking Dead a few years later, in 2018, or 5 years later to be precise, and it kind of shows, I think, that kind of big backlog of different kind of changes that Thorpe Park are very much willing to tweak this area and kind of move it with the times. Obviously they started off back in 1996, they had an attraction they were really happy with, then they wanted to change a little bit more for the modern times with X, and then even more so in 2018 with the addition of The Walking Dead. So it definitely isn't out of the question this could happen. However, if we're talking about potentially what could happen to The Walking Dead if it was to close down, X is always there. Now obviously this isn't to say that it would be X they rethemed it to. They could easily go down a very different route and go with X No Way Out. If we're talking about them reverting it back to the X brand, that is, I would be more interested in them kind of revamping what X No Way Out was, because it was, again, like I said, quite a unique attraction, had a backward section, and I think it would add a little bit more diversity to the park. But again, it's kind of up in the air. A lot of people prefer X. I just think X No Way Out, with it being a little bit older, there's a lot more room for you to kind of go, right, we can do this now because we've got this technology, maybe we can implement this here. So I think it would be a more interesting route, but realistically, either of them could return if they wanted it to. Now, obviously, there are many other options other than X, obviously. They could definitely move in a different route. They could even remove the roller coaster that's inside it entirely, which, as much as I like it, might not be a bad thing. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it's quite a large building. There's a lot of room for some different things that they could maybe implement in there. However, the fact that X No Way Out was kind of themed to computer viruses, and even like kind of that's pre-2000, so technology has changed vastly since then, so it'd be interesting to see them try and tackle that topic nowadays. Obviously they may not even implement X back in at all. If this was to happen, they might even go in a different direction, but as it stands, I would say X No Way Out probably would be my choice. It would be very welcome to see a dark ride be implemented into the building. I think there's a lot of space in there for it. Maybe something like a Vekoma Madhouse, obviously much like Hex and Haunted House Monster Party over at Legoland. They're great types of attractions, and Merlin have got experience with it before, so that would be really great. I mean, if they wanted to go even further down the line in like 4 or 5 years, they could even implement a trackless dark ride, which would be absolutely incredible. I'd love that. Obviously, it's a bit more pricey, but it's something the UK doesn't really have at the moment, like properly, especially considering we've obviously got Symbolica over at Efteling, which looks like an incredible attraction. I've still not been lucky enough to go ride it, but it would be a very welcome addition. A lot of enthusiasts would absolutely love it. But obviously that is a little bit more of a stretch because there's a lot of complications with trackless dark rides, money being one of them, so it would be interesting to see how they would tackle that, but it would be an option nonetheless. We could also see a boat ride at the park. I mean, even like an Intamin flume would be really cool, much like Valhalla over at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, and it would be nice to see another flume be built, particularly as we've lost 2 in the last decade. Both in favour for 2 new roller coasters, with Hyperia and also Wicker Man replacing their respective flumes in Loggers Leap and the Flume at Alton Towers. So it'd be nice to see one of those again actually, but obviously have the added twist that it's indoors, which can actually kind of strengthen it a little bit, obviously like we've seen with Valhalla where it's kind of in the dark and you can have all this really cool theming. So that is definitely an option. One of the less likely ones, if you ask me. I think if they kind of wanted to do that, they'd kind of approach it in a different way, but I'm not going to rule it out because it is a very, very cool idea. So there's lots of room for some different attractions that could be going in the building, but I mean, as outlandish as they are, it's fun to like kind of brainstorm what could happen, and on top of that, it's also kind of interesting to think about what theme they would take it in. Obviously at the moment, I would kind of say the Ghost Train and the Walking Dead are in a bit of a weird spot, kind of where they are not only, but also kind of the theme that they've taken on. It's branded as the Dockyard, and I think Thorpe Park were kind of going like, right, this is the kind of darker attractions that we've got here at Thorpe Park. But then they also host a lot of their events straight through the middle there, so it's kind of a weird location for the Ghost Train and the Walking Dead to be on. I am going to do another video on the Ghost Train because I think that is also a big topic of discussion about its kind of uneasy future. But we'll stay focused on the Walking Dead for now. I think there's a lot of different themes that they could go down with here, and one of my favourite kind of theories that I would really like to happen is an extension of the jungle. It would be nice to see that fleshed out a bit. At the moment it's kind of pushed right to the back of the park. You obviously kind of have the start of it just where Hyperia is ending now as you go past Burger King, and it kind of stretches right along the back past Nemesis Inferno and then kind of culminating in Rumble Rapids, so it's kind of just in a straight line. It would be nice to see it kind of spread out a little bit where the Ghost Train is and also the Walking Dead the ride. That also opens up the possibility for the Ghost Train and the Walking Dead to be rethemed to jungle attractions, which I think is very unique. We haven't got loads of those. I mean, Chessington's done a fair few, but I think Thorpe Park could definitely put their own spin on it. It'd be interesting to see how they tackle that, particularly with a log flume. That definitely fits, like I was saying earlier. You know, you could have a jungle themed log flume, and then maybe a different type of attraction if they ever decide to kind of strip out Darren Brown's Ghost Train again, another big building that's kind of not being used to its absolute fullest at the moment. They maybe also could stick with the darker theme, of course if they want to keep the Ghost Train there. One thing I would absolutely love is something maybe dark and history related, maybe something like Jack the Ripper, obviously set in the 1800s. That would be really cool, especially considering I remember back when the Ghost Train was kind of in its planning phase, its code name was obviously Project Whitechapel, and a lot of people, including myself, really thought, oh, they're doing Jack the Ripper, like Jack the Ripper's Whitechapel and all this sort of thing. It never happened in the end, and I do think it is still a really unique opportunity, especially considering Merlin's got access to the Dungeons brand. Obviously you've got the London Dungeons in London, which does feature Jack the Ripper, so it'd be cool maybe having a Dungeons themed attraction that's not an actual Dungeons, it's just kind of branded that way, and it kind of be this taking you through history of Jack the Ripper and kind of exploring this horror type thing. That would be really, really cool, something that's again very different. We've obviously got the Alton Towers Dungeons at Alton Towers, but I think it would be an interesting direction to take it if they kind of said, well no, we're not going to do a Dungeons, we're going to do a Dungeons themed attraction that isn't necessarily, you know, something you have to pay for. You know, a lot of these Dungeons experiences across the UK, you have to pay for a ticket, so it'd be nice to have something like if you love history and you're at Thorpe Park, you can go on this ride, and there's plenty of stuff they can pull from with London history as well, that has a darker theme. This would also kind of fit in with a lot of the attractions I've already discussed. Again, a flume would work very well. We know that the dungeons across the UK respectively kind of have these log flume elements in them. Even Alton Towers has one when it wants to work. So it'd be interesting to see that. Even a madhouse. Just there's lots of opportunities. You can apply history to loads of different things, so it would just be a really cool attraction to see. Another likely option could easily be Amity. This is one I don't think is very likely. I think Amity has very much got its area now. Obviously, now that Angry Birds has been removed and we've got Big Easy Boulevard, that obviously fits very naturally to each other. So I would say it's less likely, but still plausible. Again, water rides, it would fit a lot more with Storm Surge. Obviously with it kind of being next to each other, sometimes when you're in the Walking Dead queue line, it's like always a bit spooky, and then you look up and you see this big colourful water slide. I love Storm Surge though. It'll always hold a place in my heart. But it is still, again, a possibility. I'm not going to rule these things out. Easily none of this could happen and it could just stay as it is as The Walking Dead for all I know. But again, Amity, I think there's a few different things they could do, but I think the actual attractions they could hold in there and the theming is very limited if they were to go down that direction. So that kind of brings me to the end of my little thought experiment I've done here, just brainstorming some ideas. Again, at the end of the day, nothing could happen to this attraction. It could stay exactly how it is. But I thought it'd just be kind of fun to go through some things that could potentially happen in the future with Hyperia kind of on the horizon now. And to be fair, regardless of what happens to the Walking Dead ride, I think Thorpe Park's in for a very promising future. Their events continue to be absolutely fantastic. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement around the park and different things that could change. So I'm sure we'll get something substantial kind of news-wise over the next 5 years or so, even maybe a little bit longer at least. And it'll be interesting to see which direction they take it. But however, for the moment, we can just focus on being excited for Hyperia opening on the 24th of May. I'm absolutely buzzing. I'm going to be there on Saturday on the 25th. So it's just going to be bad luck if we get terrible weather. So I'm fingers crossed everything's going to be alright on that front and it can operate properly. I think they're even opening it to 8 PM, so that's going to be an absolutely fantastic day out. I can't wait for that. But yeah, that's where I'm going to leave it for today's video, guys. Again, if you did enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. I'm going to try and pump out as many videos. I've got a few very cool ideas lined up for what I'm going to be uploading within the next few months or so. So yeah, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.